Hello, and welcome back to Progressive Patriot. This will be episode 2. I was too eager to hold off on creating another episode after creating that introduction video to the channel. There's just so much for me to talk about. So, hope you all are ready. Today's topic is gender expression, and particularly in the form of masculinity, a contentious topic amongst the gay community that I am a part of, and also amongst men and young men right now that are trying to figure out what an ideal man or an ideal boy should be like. That image of what an ideal man should look like is changing. For a long time, not just in the US, but also in other Western countries and in countries outside of the West as well. What manhood has looked like has been very traditional. If you are not familiar with what that image looks like, I can go ahead and briefly explain it so that we're on the same page. This is at least my interpretation of what I've heard manhood or what the ideal man should look like. It is, you are the breadwinner, protector. You strive to be the best. You are not afraid of competition. You are persistent and stubborn and disagreeable. You are trying to climb the corporate ladder, or you're trying to be successful in your career. You need to earn a lot of money. You need to have a lot of material possessions. You need to provide. That is what it generally has seemed like to me of what a man should look like. Now, there is kind of a reckoning going on between a group of people that still believe in that ideal and a group of people that want to challenge it. And let's be straightforward. The group of people that want to challenge it are generally on the left. They're the ones that are introducing terms like gender expression, gender fluidity, non-binaryism, all those terms that the right tends to have an aversion towards, or at least a lot of people on the right with conservative and traditional values tend to have an aversion towards, because they think that those concepts, those disruptive concepts, will tarnish this social fabric that keeps societies intact. And while I will admit there probably is some merit to a nuclear family of having two parents, a stable household, and a strong father, but at the same time, I also believe in the necessity of a strong mother. Before I go into a tangent of how the virtues we should strive for are genderless, I should go back to the point I'm trying to make right now about traditional masculinity versus the new modern avant-garde take. So now that I've kind of explained what the right tends to gravitate towards, I'll go into more what the left tends to gravitate towards, which is this idea that people should act, behave, think whatever way they want. So if you're a man, you shouldn't feel compelled to have to be the breadwinner, the protector, the provider. You should feel free to embody whatever characteristics or traits you deem fit for the core of your personality. This kind of goes hand in hand with individualism. The point here is that the left thinks that men and women and those in between really shouldn't feel pressured to fit into a box. However, if we are to put a mandate on men, if we are to try to call out men and hold them accountable to live up to a certain standard, I think the standards we have in place are flawed and need to be reformed. I believe that if a man is striving to be this idealized version of a man, he should provide for his community, take care of his community, do what's right, even if it costs him, even if it means some degree of sacrifice or some threat to his self-preservation. It means sticking out for others, sticking up for others, especially those that may have a harder time sticking up for themselves, or that may be more oppressed, or that may have a lot less privilege within the systems that we live in. I think a man should have courage. I think a man should commit selfless acts for their family, for their community, for their country. If we are going to create these standards for men, I think that those should be the standards. It's very confusing for me to see a lot of prominent men nowadays in politics, in media, and in Hollywood that don't really embody those values and are still revered. It is really confusing for me to see men that are selfish, arrogant, narcissistic, and that are not doing a lot, if anything, for their communities, for others, for their country. They're doing mostly things for their own benefit, self-aggrandizing. And it doesn't make much sense to me why those types of men are being hailed. I believe the reason why is because of this sort of American persona that has prevailed for hundreds of years. A rugged, individualistic, agrarian, self-sustaining man, a cowboy, a Johnny Cash figure, right? That doesn't need anybody, doesn't need the government, can do everything on his own. I think that image has persisted. For some reason, the people that now claim to embody it don't really look like a cowboy to me or a Johnny Cash figure. That point aside, we need really to head on deal with the harm of this persona. This persona of a cowboy, of a rugged individualist, is infecting the minds of young boys, compelling them to think that they have to live up to these expectations and these pressures to be a hyper-successful, super career-oriented, ambitious, individualistic man that can do everything on his own. That has to live up to macho tenets, that needs to be very athletic and a fighter and all those things, like, and not necessarily a fighter in terms of like standing up to oppressive forces, but a fighter in the sense of being physically violent, right? That standard placed on younger men is unrealistic and also not very necessary. Let's think about the demands of modern life, at least in the US. Blue-collar jobs, not as prevalent as they used to be. We are shifting towards a thinking economy, towards a white-collar economy, towards a desk job economy, where women are starting to become close to 50-50 part of the workforce. Women are graduating more from college, they're more educated, they're taking more positions of power. The need for a protective breadwinner just isn't quite there anymore. I mean, Violent crime is at historical lows. We live in a pretty peaceful country. Of course, now there's been incidents of political violence that kind of pervade that image and taint it, which is fair to think. But the point is that statistically speaking, violent crime is an all-time low. We really don't need this gun-holding, fierce fighter husband to protect his wife and kids anymore. That necessity isn't really there. So these pressures that are placed on men to be a certain type of man really are not as essential as they might have been before. What's necessary now is men that stand up for what is right, that want the best for everyone, that are unafraid to speak their minds, even if it alienates friends, even if it pisses off authority figures. We need men that are willing to defend the Constitution, to defend the principles of a free and fair democracy, to stick up for their friends that are at risk of being deported, to stick up for their friends that might have their rights taken away, that are able to put themselves in danger in order to protect others that are way more at risk in the current day and age. That is the type of man we need. That being said, I will go off on a small little tangent at the conclusion of this video, and that is, after reading Aristotle, Marcus Aurelius, a lot of these ancient philosophers and figures, reading their material has helped me understand that virtues that we all should live up to are not gendered. To find the golden mean of character traits, of not being too selfish, not being too selfless, not being too aggressive, not being too passive, like those types of spectrum traits, finding the middle ground there is genderless. There are certain elements of virtue that everyone should strive for. We should strive to be courageous, to be honorable, to be kind, to be unafraid in the face of authoritarian powers. These are timeless and genderless and just non-categorical traits that every man, woman, and person in between should strive to embody. So for that reason, I have two angles on this topic. One is, if we want men to be a certain type of man, let's change that, because right now it's not working. And we're idolizing a lot of men that embody traits I would consider part of the dark triad of humanity. The other angle is, perhaps the standards we're trying to get men to reach should be applied for everyone. Like, what does it take to be a good person or a good-ish person? Maybe it's more than just something that fits into a gender criteria. So that kind of wraps up the topic of this video. I hope it can allow you to be a little bit easier on yourself, to follow your gut and your instinct about who you want to be in this world, and hopefully to the young boys and to the men listening, maybe reconsider some of the things you've been taught and try to find that inner voice that might be telling you that you're different from this caricature that society and people in power and cultural figures want you to conform to. Be yourself. Be the individual that you are. That is another way we can resist this coming wave of authoritarian darkness. being yourself is a form of resistance. Thanks again. Signed, your one and only Progressive Patriot.